Soon after the first day of the Battle of the Somme, thousands of families were going to be receiving telegrams sharing with them the tragic news that their family member had been killed or reported missing here on the Somme battlefields. I imagine especially tragic would be those who were going to be told their son had been killed. There's the old saying that a parent should never have to outlive their children. Well, for one family in particular, Mrs. Hobbs of 143 Union Street in Lurgan was going to be receiving the especially tragic news that 3 of her 4 sons had been killed here on the Somme battlefield. Now, we've been here before on the channel at the Ulster Memorial Tower and over in Thiepval Wood to tell the story of the 36 Ulsters who attacked here on the first day of the Battle of the Somme. Well, today we're actually going to head ever so slightly north to the other side of the Enre Valley to tell a story of one specific family. Now, the slightly unique feature of what happened in the battlefield here is that there was a small gap in the line, and that was an enforced gap on both sides by the Enre River running through the valley just here. That meant that the Irish troops who attacked here were actually split, and some of the men of the 9th Battalion were on the other side of the valley. So we're going to head over that side now and tell the rest of this story. So just to briefly orientate ourselves here, we have in this direction Thiepval. So we're currently stood outside the Ulster Memorial Tower, and we have Thiepval in this direction over here, and this is Thiepval Woods where we toured the trenches. And if we look across the other side, up here on the ridgeline, so this is kind of near Beaumont Hamel and the Newfoundland Memorial Park, and in between you'll see the land dips down and back up, and that is the Enre Valley that we're talking about. So let's head over in that direction. Okay, so we've just come to the Enre British Cemetery. It's quite a unique cemetery here because it's kind of raised up and you have to walk up this staircase to get into it. We're going to have a look at a couple of the graves in a minute, but we're actually here initially to head down the far end and talk about the land beyond the cemetery. Now, as I said, we've come over to the Enre British Cemetery, and the reason we've come here is because this cemetery sits right in the middle of what was no man's land, the area between the British and German lines on the first day of the Somme. And from the end of the cemetery, we're going to be able to have a pretty good look at the piece of land we need to be talking about when we talk about the Hobbs family. Okay, so we're currently in the upper section of the Enre British Cemetery, and the reason we've come over here is because we are now on the other side of the valley from where we started the video. So if you can see in the background on the end of the cemetery, you can see where the valley goes up the other side. Well, that's where we were. Now, over on this side, over in this direction, on the far side of these fields here, is where the British front lines were. Now, it's over here on the 1st of July 1916 that early in the morning 4 brothers, the 4 Hobbs brothers, Andrew, Herbert, David and Robert, were preparing to go into battle with the 9th Battalion of the Royal Irish Fusiliers. So where we are positioned here, and I'm going to do some map overlays so you get an idea of where we are, we're about kind of halfway out into the point of action here, and the men had to attack through this area here. Now, the challenge was, and there were several challenges, but initially, once they got out into no man's land, advancing through this area, it became apparent that the barbed wire that was supposed to have been cut by the artillery was in fact well intact. That meant that they had to start working their way through small gaps, meaning they were bunched up and became much more open targets for the German machine guns. On top of that, the British artillery had supposed to have wrecked the German artillery positions. Unfortunately, those German artillery positions were very much intact and started to pour artillery fire down onto this area as well. As the men of the Royal Irish Fusiliers advanced, they were under tremendously heavy fire. Despite that, incredibly, they managed to edge their way forwards towards their objectives. So we've just moved forwards now again to the old Poore Station, and we've come here just to kind of show the position where we are really. Now, incredibly, despite the conditions the men were dealing with, some of them did continue to push forwards. Some men even got well beyond the German front lines, and in fact got all the way as far as this point here at the old station. Despite that, they were pushed back, and some of the men who got this far ultimately were cut off and had to try to work their way back. Unfortunately, thousands of men lay wounded in no man's land. With the British attack completely repelled, the missing men started to be accounted for, and the missing included all 4 of the Hobbs brothers. Through the night on the 1st of July, men tried to creep back out into no man's land to try to rescue their fallen comrades. Men lay wounded out here in no man's land, dying of wounds that they could potentially survive from if they did receive treatment. Their brave comrades came out here again and again through the night to try to pull them in, try to rescue as many as they could. Towards the end of the night, one man was brought in on a stretcher. Both of his legs had been torn apart by machine gun fire, but somehow he'd survived, and now he was being taken back to the British line to receive treatment. That one lucky man was Herbert Hobbs. So Herbert was now receiving the treatment that he needed. Unfortunately though, thousands of other men lay wounded in no man's land. Now the problem was with this area in particular that the fighting raged on here for months, and the bodies that were laying in this area laid here during that time. That meant that by the time the British had pushed beyond this position and finally started to better clear this battlefield, the majority of the remains that they did find could not be identified. In August 1916, Herbert Hobbs returned home, but he returned home to a shattered family. David, Andrew and Robert were never found. Their bodies were never recovered, and they were officially listed as missing. Of course, later in the war, these battlefields were cleared, and numerous men were brought in to the cemetery here, the Enre cemetery, that couldn't be identified. Now, there are some who could be identified. So, for example, we have J. Smythe here of the Royal Irish Fusiliers, killed in that attack, the 1st of July 1916, only 20 years old. We also have Private W. Hall of the Royal Irish Fusiliers, again killed on the 1st of July. Then we have a soldier of the Great War, an Irish regiment. Of course, it's very possible that we're looking at the grave of David, Andrew or Robert Hobbs, but unfortunately we'll never know that. We also have graves of soldiers who couldn't be identified at all, a soldier of the Great War. So whilst it's possible the Hobbs brothers are in fact buried here in this cemetery, maybe even side by side, 3 brothers in arms, sadly that's unlikely, and for now we don't know where they are. So instead, all 3 of them are named on the Ulster Memorial to the missing. So I couldn't make a video about the Hobbs brothers without coming here to the Thiepval Memorial to see their names here on the memorial to the missing. So as I said, all three brothers were sadly never recovered, and so as such they're named on the Thiepval Memorial here, along with more than 70,000 other men who are missing. So we've got two of the brothers together over here. That's Andrew and David, named just here. Those two are together because they were privates, and then Robert Hobbs, who was a sergeant, is named right up at the top there, so you're going to have to bear with me, and I'll put a little clip of his name into the video. Anyone who's not familiar with Thiepval, it's ranked in kind of, you have the officers and the different ranks, then you have the privates. So two Hobbs brothers together, and then Robert Hobbs is up with the sergeants higher up the panel. So here we have the names of Andrew and David, and right up the top there, about this kind of height here, is Robert Hobbs. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video taking a look at the tragic story of the Hobbs brothers. It's not an unusual story. We've heard stories similar to that in World War II, and of course there's the movie Saving Private Ryan, where they're trying to rescue Private Ryan because his three brothers were killed in action. Now that's not a film that's based on this story. It is a theoretical story, but it's a very romantic story. But in reality, it's a tragic, tragic story that became a real life story for the Hobbs family. 3 out of 4 brothers killed here on the first day of the Battle of the Somme. Thanks for watching. I'm going to see you on the next one.